Welcome to this webinar about the results of the study Trans Labor Market Wallet. This last webinar is about trans people's economical situation. If you have listened to the other seminars, you have heard about the situation on labor market, about problems with unemployment, capacity to work, recruitment, and discrimination and harassments. Now we will talk about what all this results in economical terms. What happens to your economy when you can't work due to low capacity to work? Unsurprisingly, this means that trans people have very low incomes. This diagram is a little hard to read. I'll explain it. All the blue bars contain the same number of respondents, 10%. That's what the decile is. So there are just as many answers to the left of the yellow bar in the middle as there are to the right of it. The fact that the blue bars on the right are higher indicates that they have higher monthly incomes. And in the middle, we have the yellow bar, the median income. It is usually the more accurate value if you want to get an overview of the values for an entire group, since the average value, as you see in the yellow bar on the far right, is always affected by extreme values from a few individuals, while these extreme values do not say much about the group as a whole. So if you look at the yellow bar in the middle again, you can see that in Sweden, the median income for trans people after taxes and including benefits are 17 Swedish crowns a month. That's not so much for being a median income. It's even lower in Finland. It's 1,200 euro a month. One of the explanations for this difference is that younger people have lower income and the respondents from Finland are younger, but that is not the whole explanation. So both in Finland and Sweden, trans people do have low incomes. And it becomes even clearer if we look at quartiles, which means we have divided our respondents into four groups and are comparing the 25% with the lowest income with the 50% with middle income and the 25% with the highest income. As you can see, in Finland, the 25% with lowest income doesn't have more than maximum 900 euro per month. And in Sweden, the 25% with the lowest income have a maximum of 12,000 Swedish kronor. That's not much at all. 25% is not an insignificant part of a group. A lot of trans people have a very low income. And we look at the medium income of the 50% in the middle of the group. It's better, but still rather low incomes. Between 901 and 2,000 euros a month in Finland, and 12,001 and 27,600 kronas a month in Sweden. So 75% have lower incomes than 2,000 euros in Finland and 75,600 kronas in Sweden. And the 25 with higher incomes have about 2,000 euros a month in Finland and 27,600 kronas in Sweden. The high income earners are not very rich in trans context. We did also see some differences when it comes to gender identity. And one of the more interesting was that the ones with a gender identity other than man or women more often had low income. But we have to say that this difference is small and the result is unsure. Since the high income earners still have relatively moderate incomes, we reduced the group to see what happened if we look only at the top 10%. And as always, when the material is small, interpret this with caution. It's not that many individuals. This group, the top 10 with the highest income, earned over 2,600 euro a month in Finland and over 36,000 a month in Sweden, after taxes and including benefits. So here we do have people who are actually high income earners. And it's interesting because here we can see a difference in gender. Women are overrepresented. You can see the light blue staple is much more higher than the purple one for women. That's the left staples, both in Finland and Sweden. And in the middle, you can see the man, and on the right ones, you can see the other gender identities. There are other differences as well, not at least when it comes to ages. In the youngest group, the ones that are 18 to 25 years old, 50% who have incomes below 900 euros in Finland or 12,000 kronas in Sweden, the low income group. And in the older group, 45 years and over, it's almost the opposite. 45% have incomes over 2,000 euros in Finland and 27,600 kronas in Sweden. The blue staples are the proportion of people with low income within each age group, and the yellow and purple ones are the proportion of people with middle or high income within the age group. And you can see the blue bar is much higher in the youngest group, the one on the left in both diagram, and lower in the right where the older group is. And the purple bar are higher in the older group. You can also see that the 10% that had the highest income, the proportion of older people were notably larger. As I already said, the income are lower in Finland, but they are both younger and less of them do work. It's not enough to look at income when you want to know if a group are having a hard time or not because of them being poor, which normally is what you are looking for studying minority groups. You also have to check the economical vulnerability. So we did that. We asked 4 questions about economical vulnerability, and we asked about if they had been allowed debt settlements at some point during the last 5 years. We asked about if they had been allowed social support at some point during the last 5 years. We asked about how much effort they put into making ends meet, where the answer "I have to work very hard" or "quite hard to make ends meet" was our indicator for being vulnerable. And we asked if they could manage an unexpected cost, 13,000 kronas, or in Finland 1,800 euros, without getting a loan or ask for help. The explanation for the slightly different amounts, 1,800 euros do not correspond to 13,000 krona, is that there are different cost situations in Finland and Sweden. So the amounts are equally financially burdensome. And what we found was that only 11% had no economical vulnerability at all. That's the purple part of the bar. 60% had one form. That's the light blue part. And 27% had two forms vulnerability. That's the yellow part. And 2%, and this is only 17 individuals, so interpret it with great caution, had 3 or more forms of economical vulnerability. If we also take into account in the analysis that we only asked about the last 5 years in terms of debt reconstructing and social assistance, these figures are worrying. It was clear from our qualitative material that there were those who had previously had social assistance or debt reconstructing but further back in time. There were also cases where respondents had sought social assistance or debt reconstruction but had not received it. We saw nothing that indicate that the reason why they not received it was related to being trans. However, there were cases where people had tried to seek social assistance but had not succeeded due to poor health, and there were several answers where people had had major problems with debt or difficulties making a living, but resolved it through support from relatives or friends. That is also a form of vulnerability, to be more or less on the mercy of one's network to manage one's finances, but it is a vulnerability we didn't measure. We did find differences when looked into age and vulnerability, but here it's another pattern than it is in income. The youngest group that are least economical vulnerable, and the middle group, the ones that are 25 to 45 years old, that are the most economical vulnerable. We don't know why, but we think this might have to do with differences in support burden. Men in the young group might still live with their parents, but also do remember being dependent on others for one's livelihood is a kind of vulnerability that's not visible only because we didn't ask about it. So what causes these low incomes and economical vulnerability? We understand that it's largely due to the group working to such a low degree, and that it also depends on the capacity to work. If we look at a group with full capacity to work and income, they're underrepresented in the low income group and overrepresented in the high income group. When it comes to the ones with no capacity to work, it's only 2% and 3% in the high income group, and 51% and 31% in the low income group. And if we look at occupation and vulnerability, we see that the ones that actually are employed is 13% who have no vulnerability, and 18% live under two forms of vulnerability, while among the ones that are on long-time sick leave or unemployed, it's only 5% who have no vulnerability, and as much as half of them live under two or three forms of economical vulnerability. One can also consider how much poverty itself causes even worse capacity to work. Is there a kind of loophole in the system that some trans people are unable to escape? This is a thought-provoking quote from the survey, which perhaps also says something about what it can be like already early in adult life for some trans people. For me, poverty is the biggest reason for my poor capacity to work. If I had received a minimum of social security, no homelessness, etc., when I was young, perhaps my capacity to work would not have become as poor as it is today. So, what are the conclusions? We have earlier in the seminars seen that live as oneself is good for the capacity to work. Capacity to work affects if you have a job or not, and that affects income and economic vulnerability. We have also seen that transition in form of gender-affirming treatment and change of legal gender affects capacity to work. And as I said before, capacity to work affects if you have a job or not, and that affects income and economic vulnerability. And finally, we have seen that problematic recruitment, minority stress, and the capacity to work altogether affects whether you have a job or not, and that affects income and economic vulnerability. And probably in the start of all this, we have the cis norm and discrimination. Therefore, our conclusions are that the cis norm in society results in, by other things, discrimination and minority stress. That affects recruitment and the work environment. It also affects the capacity to work. Both recruitment, work environment, and capacity to work affects trans people's income and economic vulnerability. Thank you for listening. If you have not already done that, now you can please read the report.